I'm going to queue up some slides here. Give me a moment. I'm glad to see everybody here for this first session of our conference, and as always, I'm glad to get to talk about sustainability benefits of biodiesel. And trying to get my viewer mode to comply so I'm seeing the same thing you guys are seeing. Well, I'll work with it. So the National Biodiesel Board is the first national trade association for fuel producers to develop and adopt our own definition of sustainability, as well as sustainability principles. And we didn't start with a blank page. We went out and looked at several other organizations that had done similar things, that developed principles and defined sustainability. But we took the best from those, and this is how the National Biodiesel Board defines sustainability. And we define that as meeting today's needs for environmental stewardship, economic prosperity, and quality of life without compromising future generations' ability to meet those needs for themselves. And if I could draw your attention to the last half of that definition, without compromising future generations' ability to meet these needs for themselves. And I want to spend some time just thinking about that concept and what it means to us in general, not just when it comes to biodiesel, but in general. And essentially what it means to me is we need to preserve choices for our future generations. Sustainability is not just about the environment. Sustainability is about providing as much freedom for future generations as we enjoy today. And we need to provide them the freedom and liberty to make those decisions because we're not in a position to understand what they will need or what they will want or how they will value the trade-offs between the environment and the economy, the way that we make those decisions today. So our job to pursue sustainability for future generations is to make sure we don't limit their choices. And one of the key things that we can do to provide as many choices and options for future generations is to preserve or conserve resources. If we use a resource to the point of extinction, well, we've limited the options, we've limited the freedom for future generations because they won't have the opportunity to decide what they would do with that resource. And so we need to be cognizant of that when it comes to using non-renewable resources. I mean, obviously, as we're consuming a resource that can't be replaced, we're driving it towards extinction. And so that emphasizes the need to look at renewable resources. What can we accomplish with renewable resources? The more things that we can use in a renewable fashion, the better. We also need to be cognizant that we use them responsibly so that they truly are renewable and we don't extinguish those as well. And examples of renewable resources that are relevant to agriculture and biodiesel are things like soil, water, and air. Those are resources that we can use them through agriculture to produce food and fuel, and yet they're reusable, so we can continue relying on those. And it's also true that biodiversity is one of the great natural resources that we need to preserve for future generations. In order to preserve biodiversity, we need to preserve the systems that support that. We need to preserve natural habitat, and we need to preserve the climate because all of the organisms on the planet are relying on those things together. We are fortunate that we live on a planet that has lots of cycles that renews everything. In fact, the planet has been renewing itself and renewing all of the material resources on the face of the planet long before we started using those to build our human societies, right? So there are cycles that renew water and carbon and nitrogen. They all have natural cycles of renewal. They're all powered by the sun. And so this provides us clues that if we want our society to be sustainable, we can model our systems on these natural systems that recycle themselves, and we can use solar energy, not only to recycle our material resources, but also to power our economy. We need to make our economy powered by the sun, just the way the planet has been powered by the sun. And there's a lot of power in this concept because we think about, what underlies our economy. Where do we create wealth in the base of our economy? For the last 200 years, we did it by extracting natural resources. We started with an entire continent of natural resources, and we went out and populated that continent, and we mined the minerals, and we logged the timber, and we turned all that stuff into wealth. And we could still do some of that in a responsible way, but we have this tremendous resource in the sun that's delivering free energy on our doorsteps on our rooftops literally every single day. And through agriculture, we can turn that free, powerful, renewable resource into things that we need, into food and fuel that are good for society and also build wealth for our economy. Now, that's what makes me so enthusiastic about biomass and bioenergy and biodiesel in particular. And so if I could go back to our definition of sustainability, the other half of that definition, meeting today's needs for environmental stewardship, economic prosperity, and quality of life. And these are commonly referred to as the three pillars of sustainability. You'll see these repeated in lots of other definitions of sustainability. It's about the environment, the economy, and quality of life. And it's about pursuing a balance between these three things because they often compete with one another. And we're fortunate that biodiesel happens to do good things for all three of these. Biodiesel does good things for the environment, for the economy, and for quality of life. The sustainability benefits of biodiesel are multiple. Biodiesel increases energy security. Biodiesel supports jobs and economic benefits. The industry itself has a commitment to fuel quality and performance. That's part of our sustainability as an industry. And biodiesel itself provides real environmental benefits. And if we were to talk specifically about some of these benefits, in terms of energy security, I've borrowed some statistics from the US EPA. These are numbers that they put forth when they implemented the Renewable Fuel Standard. They projected that in the course of the program, the Renewable Fuel Standard would generate $2.6 billion in energy security benefits. So this was an estimate based on how much money is it going to save us when we're producing our own fuel instead of having to secure access to foreign petroleum. In addition to that, just the mere fact that we are producing our own fuel instead of importing it is going to save $41.5 billion. So combined, we've got $44 billion of energy security benefits from the Renewable Fuel Standard. And that's including benefits from biodiesel and ethanol together. Specifically, when it comes to biodiesel, we can quantify the economic benefit from the biodiesel industry. And the biodiesel industry, as it exists in 2016, supports approximately 55,000 jobs. And those jobs combined pay nearly $2.2 billion in wages. And together, with all the economic activity that's spurred by the biodiesel industry, we're creating $9.8 billion in total economic activity. And again, that's an estimate based on the size of the biodiesel industry in 2016. We can grow these numbers as we grow the biodiesel industry. I'm going to move on to talk about the environmental benefits of biodiesel, and they are also multiple. Biodiesel produces cleaner, safer diesel exhaust emissions. Biodiesel has superior energy efficiency, which is linked to reducing carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. Biodiesel itself is non-toxic and biodegradable. And the production of biodiesel reduces wastewater and hazardous waste production relative to petroleum manufacturing. I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about the cleaner, safer emissions. So this chart shows the reduction in emissions we get when we use B100 biodiesel in place of petroleum, or if we use a 20% biodiesel blend. And we can show significant reductions in each of these. For B100, we've got reductions approaching 50% and greater for all of these categories of unburned hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and ozone potential. All of these pollutants have a direct impact on human health, and biodiesel does a really good job of reducing these emissions. And another way to quantify that, if we look at the biodiesel that was put into the market in 2016, 2.1 billion gallons of biodiesel, reduced emissions by approximately 10 million pounds of particulate matter, 114 million pounds of carbon monoxide, and 14 million pounds of hydrocarbons. And these all have health benefits. If we look just at the particulate matter, reducing particulate matter by 10 million pounds has a statistical effect of preventing 30 to 60 premature deaths. In addition to preventing premature deaths, as if that wasn't enough, has a monetary benefit equal to $100 to $600 million. And this is an attempt to quantify things like going to the doctor less trips to the ER, less days of missed work. These are all a way to quantify the emissions reductions and the improved health impact of replacing diesel fuel with a biodiesel blend. I'm going to move on and talk about the energy efficiency and the life cycle carbon reduction of biodiesel. And these two things are linked. And what I'll show here in this table is over the years, there have been several published reports quantifying the life cycle reduction of greenhouse gases from biodiesel. And depending on the year they were done and the data that was available, sometimes depending on the different allocations method used, we get slightly different numbers, but you can see a relative harmonization in those results of about an 80% greenhouse gas reduction compared to petroleum. And this makes sense if we compare it to what we know about the energy inputs to producing biodiesel. So the energy in biodiesel largely comes from the sun, and it's largely carbon neutral, but we do use some fossil fuels in the process of making biodiesel. We still use some petroleum in tractors on the farm. We use petroleum in trucks that deliver feedstocks and deliver finished fuel. We use natural gas and electricity in biodiesel conversion plants. And we have to take responsibility for those fossil fuel emissions in the process. And if we compare the energy inputs to the energy produced, for every unit of fossil fuel energy we put into that process, we get 5 units of usable energy out. We're gaining energy because the sun is investing energy in that vegetable oil or in those animal fats. And so it makes sense if you convert that, if we're a fifth of our energy comes from fossil fuels, it makes sense that we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions by about 80% relative to petroleum. If we could use 100% renewable resources, if we could use biodiesel in those trucks and tractors, and if we could use windmills and photovoltaics to power our biodiesel conversion plants, we could easily drive our greenhouse gas reduction to 100%. But that's basically how we arrive at those numbers. I'll also point out that the studies published here all use soybean oil as the feedstock for biodiesel. And I'm generally comfortable using soybean oil as a surrogate because it's still the largest single feedstock for our industry. But the industry is becoming more diverse all the time. This represents the feedstocks that are used for biomass-based diesel in the U.S. So in the last several years, slightly less than half of the biomass-based diesel has been produced using soybean oil. In 2015, about 7% of those feedstocks was canola oil, with the remainder being made of relatively equal portions of used cooking oil, animal fats, and distiller's corn oil as a byproduct of ethanol production. So we talk about soy biodiesel as a surrogate quite often, but we always do need to recognize that the industry is very diverse. And each of these feedstocks, you can find a life cycle paper that's published for the individual feedstocks. And those numbers, will be slightly different from time to time. But if we take a weighted average based on the volume of these feedstocks that we use every year, and based on the latest published research, coincidentally, we still land at about an 80% greenhouse gas reduction for the biodiesel industry as a whole. And it's convenient, but entirely coincidental, that if we have an 80% greenhouse gas reduction relative to petroleum, that for every 100 gallons of biodiesel, we reduce 1 ton of CO2 emissions. So if you ever see this graph that shows the growth of the biodiesel industry by volume, it's the same shape as the graph that shows the carbon reduction for the biodiesel industry. The vertical scale just changes a little bit. So for biomass-based diesel in the U.S. last year, we used about 2.7 billion gallons, and in turn, we reduced carbon emissions by 27 million tons. And Cody touched on these issues, that the biodiesel itself is non-toxic and biodegradable. It's safer to handle than petroleum fuels. I'm not sure how relevant this is today, because we've got a 100-year history of being quite comfortable handling toxic and explosive fuels for our vehicles. But if you're interested in making that safer and better for the environment, biodiesel is a good way to do that. And when it comes to protecting our water resources, the best way to protect our water resources is to not pollute them in the first place. And these numbers come from a DOE paper that's almost 2 decades old, but comparing biodiesel production with petroleum diesel production, biodiesel reduces wastewater production by 79% and reduces hazardous waste production by 96%. And again, just like our life cycle numbers for greenhouse gases in total, we have to bear some responsibility for the fossil fuels that we use, and that's why we can't get our hazardous waste reduction down to 100%, is because we're still using some fossil fuels in the process, and there's always some degree of hazardous waste production that comes along with refining petroleum products. So summing up, I've told you some of the reasons why biodiesel as a fuel has properties that make it sustainable. But in this slide, I also want to share some bullet points and sort of pair the fuel with the industry. And that includes everybody in this room, and it includes our membership and our leaders that make the industry as a whole sustainable. So biodiesel as a fuel provides real environmental benefits. Biodiesel increases energy security, supports jobs and economic benefits. Our industry, and Scott's going to talk more about our commitment to fuel quality and performance, our industry has a commitment to those things. Our industry has a commitment to education and outreach, responsible goal setting, successful public policy. All of this combines so that our organization and the members of our organization really emphasize science and quantified analysis and tackling challenges head on. So that's why I'm privileged to be here to talk to you about why biodiesel is so good, because everybody in this room is part of that. It's also about the industry that promotes this fuel. And before I pass on the stage and the microphone, I do want to thank some of the funders that help us quantify some of these impacts. USDA and the Nebraska Soybean Board have provided some of the funding that help us quantify many of these impacts. So I want to thank them, as well as I thank everybody here in the room. And with that, I think I'll invite Scott up to tell you more about our technical program.